Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in another minute or so. Just give folks a couple minutes to get on. Hi, everyone. We're going to start in about 30 seconds. Thanks. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Hello and welcome to the webinar on Agile Development in ServiceNow. Master your Scrum skills. My name is Mark Calloway, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. In today's webinar, we'll cover 3 topics. First, we want to give you a quick overview of Covestic and why we are uniquely positioned to be your partner for a ServiceNow PPM implementation. Second, we want to give you an overview of the ServiceNow PPM Suite. And third, we'll focus on Scrum best practices enabled by ServiceNow. The ServiceNow PPM Suite is a set of powerful tools that can help transform your organization's PMO, but starting too much to change too fast can cause severe organizational heartburn and worse, stop a PMO transformation in its tracks, almost as fast as a lack of sponsorship. Today we will continue to expand on our recommended approach for a ServiceNow PPM implementation, the journey, if you will, as well as provide a live demo of detailed project planning features in ServiceNow. Before we get started, let me introduce the team. As I previously mentioned, my name is Mark Calloway, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. My role at Covestic is business development and helping our customers advance their service management and business goals, gaining more value from the ServiceNow platform. In the past, as a CSM and Agile enthusiast, I've worked with organizations to adopt and streamline their Agile development processes. Joining me today is Len Reynolds, who will provide you an overview and demo of the ServiceNow Project and Portfolio Management Suite. Len has over 18 years of public and private IT industry experience, including project and vendor management, and over 11 years of ITSM, process design, process improvement, and delivery experience. Len is also ITIL Foundations, PMP, and Scrum Master certified, as well as a certified ServiceNow implementation specialist. As we go through today's session, if you have any questions regarding what is being presented, please feel free to type in your question in the question box located on your screen. We'll do our best to answer the questions at the end of the session, but for some reason we're unable to get to all of the questions. We'll follow up via email. Also, the contents of this webinar will be posted on our Covestic website at www.covestic.com for playback or sharing with other members of your organization who were unable to attend today's session. With that, let's get started. Covestic is a full-service consulting firm and Silver ServiceNow Partner headquartered in Kirkland, Washington. We employ over 200 senior-level consultants averaging 15 years of professional consulting and IT operations experience, and have been delivering service management solutions since 2001. Covestic's expertise is organized into 3 practice areas. First, our IT operations services practice focuses on developing, standardizing, and operating IT operations functions, including cloud and enterprise infrastructure, security operations, applications administration, and operations build and run. Second, our project delivery services practice focuses on providing project leadership to deliver complex IT projects. Covestic's experience in project management ensures compliance, quality, and timing of projects and deliverables align with our client lifestyle practices. Third, our IT service management consulting practice focuses on assessing, defining, and implementing optimized IT service management solutions, with ServiceNow being the only service management solution partnership. With over 100 successful ServiceNow projects, Covestic is a unique partner in that we combine deep ServiceNow platform expertise with a specialized practice area focusing on creating PPM solutions and project delivery. Our people-first, practical approach and guidance to projects have allowed us to achieve an average CSAT score of over 9 out of 10 and hundreds of clients like you see here who love us. With that, I'll turn the webinar over to Len to talk about the ServiceNow PPM Suite, Covestic Scrum Best Practices Overview, and a live demo of Part 3 of this transformation, Agile Development.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So what you see on screen is a high-level view of ServiceNow's IT. Of ServiceNow's IT Business Management Suite. It consists of 8 modules focused on making organizations more competitive and innovative. ServiceNow Project Portfolio Management aligns project investments and consolidates resource and project data into a single system. This allows organizations to plan strategically and improve the effectiveness of their project management activities. Being a part of ServiceNow IT Business Management portfolio enables a seamless and end-to-end process for initiating project requests and balancing the project portfolio. It also gives organizations a single system to track ITSM and PPM work and allows you to spend more time using your tools rather than learning how to use your tools. We'll focus on the Agile Development application today. So Covestic's recommended approach to the PPS suite is to approach it in a 3-phase manner. On screen, you see our recommended 3-phase approach to evolve the PPS suite to get your business to a fully functioning portfolio managed organization which incorporates operational costs and enterprise resource demands. How far you evolve the platform and which elements are activated is ultimately up to you and based on your business needs. The goals of Phase 1 are to collect ideas and demand from the organization and to have a repeatable way to decision demand, and to create a portfolio of projects with enough information to support executive or high-level status reporting. The goals of Phase 2 are to introduce program management as another means of classifying and organizing projects, to introduce Agile development and distinguish between Agile and waterfall phases, and to fully understand how to build and track detailed project schedules, and to turn on individual project status reporting. The activities in Phase 3 close the loop on project budget, cost tracking, resource planning, and allocation across project and non-project work, and time tracking. So as a gentle reminder, our first PPM webinar covered capturing ideas from the business for potential new projects, decisioning ideas and creating demand records, adding key information to the demand record to support prioritizing and qualifying demands, creating projects from approved demands, adding waterfall, Agile, or test phases and key milestones to a new project, and building project portfolios and associating project records with portfolios. Our second and most recent PPM webinar covered creating the project plan in more detail through imports and data entry, building project activities, project task relationships, and managing the WBS, adding projects to programs, and enabling status reporting. Both of those webinars are available on our Covestic website. This webinar will focus on setting up your environment and data to support Scrum, creating a product, themes, epics, and user stories, performing backlog grooming and sprint planning, and using ServiceNow to support your key ceremonies. We'll also be looking at how to track burndown and velocity. So with all that, let's get started. All right. So here I'm in my developer instance of ServiceNow. I have logged in as a product owner, and I'll be working out of the Agile Development application. For those of you that have been on the platform for a while, the Agile Development application used to be called SDLC. It was enabled through the SDLC Scrum Process Pack plugin. Users that need to work in this application will need to have the roles of Scrum Admin and Scrum User in order to see the application and action those activities within the application. One thing to note is the Agile Development application is a very data-driven application, and there is a best order or a best sequence of events of how you set up your environment and set up your data. So first, you would start by identifying your product, that's an application model inside the system, and identifying your product owner. Here I'm using ServiceNow as an example. From there, you can begin to articulate the releases that you want to do to release new functionality to the environment for this particular product. I've identified one release, but you can have as many as you like, particularly if this is a product you're going to use in your organization for a while, and you'll be enabling additional functionality through a series of releases. To provide a bit more detail about this release and a way to categorize stories, you can also articulate themes. So here inside our ITSM core functionality release, we've identified the themes of incident management and knowledge management for an additional level of detail. And then likewise, you can identify ethics, again, to classify, organize, categorize like or similar stories to support reporting and calculation. Here we've identified the ethics of incident management core, major incident management, and knowledge management. And those stories all align with ethics and themes and map up to the product. So let's go ahead and take a look at the release. You have the ability to set a default team, the team that's going to be working on this release. And you also have the ability to enable the team here or associate a team with this release here. These 100 points that show up with this team are actually calculated from the available capacity per sprint for each team member. And this goes into calculating both your burn down, your velocity, and key metrics for each sprint. We have 4 sprints that have been identified to support this release so far. Again, organizations can work together to figure out if they want what type of sprint cycle they want to do, whether they want to do a weekly sprint cycle, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks. And based on that, you can begin to build your sprint schedule and start associating your stories with those sprints. The next key activity is really to begin to build out your backlog. Typically that's going to, often begin before a planned release. You'll start collecting enhancement requests and defects from your users over time, and then after review of those defects and enhancements, you can articulate the stories that goes into your backlog. So this begins to formulate the list of stories, the list of activities that you want to do to enable new functionality or correct bugs for this particular product. Before we go and look at a story, actually let's open up the story. So the key components of a story, and this is kind of the primary record that you'll be working on the majority of the time, is again, you have the automatically generated number, you've got the product, here ServiceNow we've associated with our release. You could have a theme, you've got the release associated with it, and then this happens to be sitting in sprint number 1. You also have the ability to associate the epic. The priority is a way, again, to prioritize the stories in your backlog, and that will help inform you when you do ranking and sprint planning. You also have a couple of types that are available to you, primarily development and documentation. A lot of the work that will happen inside these sprints will be development and configuration work on the application, but you may also have documentation activities such as developing training materials, developing testing materials, documenting what changes were performed in the system, and this is a way to distinguish between development and documentation stories. Very standard life cycle associated with stories. Stories start off in a draft mode. Sort of a rule of thumb, when they are ready to be worked, and by that I mean when they have points identified, points associated with them, as well as acceptance criteria, then they are typically understood to be ready to be picked up by a developer. And then once the story is in progress or is in action, is being actively worked, then the developer would move it to work in progress. When the development or configuration work is completed and it's ready for testing, this ready for testing state can be used to let the tester know if this is a story that's ready for testing. And then once the tester picks it up, the story can be moved to the testing state to show that it's actually being tested. And then once the work for the story is done, we move it to complete. So very, very standard life cycle used to track work over the course of the development cycle. Likewise, you've got classification here. Again, classification is a mechanism to distinguish between an enhancement and a defect, or a feature and a defect. Some organizations will use stories to capture defects post-production to get those defects into the backlog for work. There is also an enhancement as well as a defect. Both of those modules are inside the Agile Development application, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. Those are other mechanisms for tracking enhancement and defect work that you can then turn into stories. Likewise, there's a blocked feature. This is a way for the team or the Scrum Master to show that a story is blocked, that it needs some type of action, say a decision or escalation to leadership or more resources. The story will stay blocked until the team is ready to pick it up and work on it again, until that issue has been resolved. Description is an area to provide some more detail about the story. And then the acceptance criteria, of course, is where you would specify what's your completion criteria, what acceptance criteria, what needs to happen for this story to be considered complete and ready for testing, ready to move on. So from there, one of the key pieces of the Agile Development application is the planning board. Actually, I have it open over here. The planning board, the first thing you do is you pick your release, and it's got a left side and a right side. So for this view, where I have product backlog on the left side and Scrum release backlog on the right, this is the mechanism that you use to do product backlog grooming. So stories that are sitting in the product backlog on this side are associated with the product but are not associated with a release. So from here, you see we have a story that is associated with the product but not associated with a release. So in order to associate it with a release, I simply grab it and I move it to the right. So now it is in the release backlog, and this will become important when we do sprint planning. You also have the ability to move stories up and down in the list to rank them. You also have the ability to rank stories from the list view on the sprint, which we'll see in a moment. So now if I toggle this left side to the Scrum release backlog and the right side to the sprint backlog, then I'll see all of my stories that, again, are associated with a release but do not have a sprint identified and are available for sprint planning. So here, if I want to begin to populate my sprint for knowledge management, I can grab the knowledge stories that are in the release backlog, slide them right, and they will now be in the sprint. Okay, so now let's go to our sprint. So the sprint that we just took a look at, you'll notice we moved an additional story over into this sprint. So now, if I look in the list of stories, I'll see that it's there. Here we also see our 4 team members with their available points. These are the points that they're available to work on each sprint. So that's what comprises the team points that shows the capacity for the sprint. The story points that are associated with the sprints are derived from the associated stories. So each of these stories were 8 pointers, so therefore we have 16 story points. And completed points, that number will grow as we complete stories within the sprint. So this is a good view that you can use if you're a Scrum Master and you're running your daily stand-up and you want to have a quick look at the sprint and the work that's, the stories that are actively being worked in that sprint. You can use this to manage that stand-up every day. Some Scrum Masters prefer to work out of the list view and again can open up individual records and adjust the priority as needed, move it from state to state, adjust the points perhaps. There is another, and you also have the ranking available to you here. Another view, if you prefer more of a card or a visual Kanban view, you click the story progress board. And I see my 2 stories that are in the sprint. I see their current states. So again, if I am managing my daily stand-up, I have the ability to move this story from one state to another. The other things that you can do from this view, this little circle with the line through it shows, this gives you the ability to block or unblock a story from this view. You do see the points that are associated with the story. You also have the ability to add a task. And we're going to take a look at what this task looks like in just a second. So this is a nice view for Scrum Masters to use. Again, it's more of a visual Kanban view, but you always have the list view available to you. So here I'm going to open up the story. So one of the other things that is available to teams is there are Scrum Tasks. And Scrum Tasks allow you to create another record associated with the story for either more detailed work or perhaps if someone is helping you with the story. Say, for instance, you've got a developer that's working on the primary parts of the story, but you need some help from either a QA tester or another person in the organization. This is a way to assign that work to them. And here, rather than points, we are actually tracking hours. And so this allows you to plan the hours that we think this task is going to take. You can add as many tasks as you like to support that particular story. And you can also show dependencies in between these stories. Again, this is a good way to show if a particular story needs to have other stories finished before it can be worked. You can set up these dependencies here. So the last thing of note, to move a story from a draft state into ready, you will have to add, or you need to add acceptance criteria. You will not be able to move it to a non-draft state without adding acceptance criteria, because that essentially says the story is ready to be worked. It's ready to be picked up and actioned. So now, let's go to a completed sprint. So a couple of reports that are available to teams and Scrum Masters are the Burndown Chart and the Team Velocity Chart. The Burndown Chart has 3 key pieces of information. It has the total committed points, in other words, the estimated points for this particular sprint, which was 42. Has the ideal burn down. So this is ServiceNow saying if I spread my points evenly over the period of time, I would get to 0 at the last day of the sprint, and the burn down would look like this, which typically does not happen. You also have the actual burn down, which shows how the work was actually performed, where perhaps you went along and not a lot got completed, and then suddenly a whole bunch got completed, or work got completed over time. So it shows how the progress actually happened within that sprint. The last, or another additional chart that is available, after you have a couple of completed sprints under your belt, you can look to see the velocity of the team. You can see how that team is performing. You know, are they able to complete more story points, fewer story points? It gives you some other data points to see how the velocity of the team is progressing. So here we see in sprint 1, we were able to complete 42, and then in sprint 3, major incident, we got about 20 points done for this period or for those sprints. Again, this is another data point that you can use to see, well, you know, are we hitting roadblocks? Are we not allocating the team as fully as we might? Are we over-allocating them here? Or are we simply just not able to complete stories as quickly over time? So a couple more things before we end the demo. You might recall from our first 2 webinars that you do have the ability to add sprints and stories to Agile phases within projects. So you can add sprints and stories to Agile phases within projects. You can also add sprints and stories here to releases. And the stories that are associated with projects are still able to be pulled into sprint planning and added to your sprint so that they could be worked. So again, if you've got activities that are coming in from projects as well as activities that are coming in from releases, you're able to see that work within the system. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, a couple of the other parts of this application, we have enhancements and we have defects. So again, it's up to organizations to decide how they're going to interact with the tool. If they elect to use stories and designate them as defects, that's one mechanism. You can also capture defects from the environment here. If you capture a defect from the environment, you have the opportunity to create a story by simply right-mouse clicking on the header, and the same thing for enhancements. So this, again, will create a story that you can pull into your backlog and pull into your sprints and work through your normal Scrum practices, and you'll have that association between the defect and the story. Okay, so that completes our demo on Scrum and Agile Development. With that, I will turn it back over to you, Mark.
Great, thanks, Lynn. I've got a couple questions actually while you were in there. The use of, in your sprint planning section, the use of the blocks box. Does that suggest that all team members might use ServiceNow on a daily basis instead of a single administrator?
It does, actually. Typically, teams are in the system actively working their stories. They're adding content to their stories. They're adding acceptance criteria. They very well could be progressing them across the various states, and they can use the planning board or just updating the states themselves to do that. They don't have to wait until the daily and have the Scrum Master do it. They can be active participants of the tool.
Great, thanks, Lynn. I've got another question as well. In general, will the ServiceNow tool provide hints as to what you might be missing if you cannot advance to another state? For example, draft to a ready state.
Right. One of the things you might have noticed is it was grayed out, but acceptance criteria has an asterisk by it. That asterisk is bright red, showing that it's a required field, and it will prompt the person filling out the story record that they need to put some content in that acceptance criteria field in order for it to move forward. Likewise, that's something that's across the ServiceNow system. When you encounter required information, you'll be prompted to fill it in.
Okay, thanks. And just a reminder, everyone, if you have any other questions, please go ahead and submit those in the question box so we can answer those, as many of those as possible. If we run out of time, we'll follow up answers with email with you. The final question I've got here, while we wait for any more, can I manage my projects, my project tasks, resources, and dependencies in ServiceNow?
Yes, and actually we covered that in a fair amount of detail in the second webinar. You can set up portfolio records and for groups of projects, and then articulate your individual projects, build out the WBS. There's a really handy aspect to projects called the Planning Console that allows you to not only add your project tasks, but put dependencies in between those tasks. And you can also insert Agile and testing. We didn't spend a lot of time on testing in this webinar, but you can also add testing phases to track your testing activities inside the project. And likewise, that's an additional module that's available inside the application to track your testing activities while you're doing Scrum work. So yeah, there's a whole rest of the ITBM suite for project portfolio management that, again, that was covered in the second webinar to manage those activities in addition to your Scrum and SDLC.
Thanks, Len. Another question here, does the app allow or facilitate joint team estimation, as in planning poker?
Joint team estimation as in planning poker. I mean, it definitely supports the ability to estimate your available capacity. It supports the ability to estimate your story points for stories, and then use those to support sprint planning and also track your velocity. Is that kind of what you mean, or?
Yeah, I think that was the gist. Any other questions? Don't see anything being submitted on. I'm sure we'll get some after, so we'll definitely follow up with email with you. But hopefully today's demo allowed you to see the benefits of using ServiceNow PPM Suite. ServiceNow PPM can not only replace the spreadsheets you are using to track projects, but it can also be the one and only tool you use in your organization for both project and non-project work. Lastly, if you have any additional information or questions, please feel free to send us an email at servicenow@covestic.com. That will conclude today's session. Thank you for attending, and remember to keep an eye out for upcoming webinars. We have two that are slated for November. One is an introduction to automated testing in ServiceNow with practical tips and tricks. And actually the second would be in December, CMDB and avoiding categorization sprawl and redundancy with the CMDB. Thank you again for attending, and we look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Mike.